Mr. Quigley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mark Twain once said that actions speak than words, but not nearly as often. Since last week's tragic Amtrak accident, we've heard plenty of words about the need for stronger rail safety measures and investments in our infrastructure. But it's time for Congress to back up these words with action. It's time for Congress to put its money where its mouth is. We know how to prevent tragic accidents like the one that happened on Amtrak last week. We even mandated new technology called positive train control that would have prevented it. But what Congress has refused to do is to pay to actually get it done. Positive train control is a game changer for rail safety. The technology would have likely prevented 140 train accidents that caused more than 280 deaths and $300 million in property damage since 1969. But this safety technology is also incredibly complex and expensive to implement. We have mandated a technology that's expected to cost billions, and we're forcing the nation's railroads to foot the entire bill. Much of this last week's focus has been on Amtrak, but despite last week's accident, Amtrak is actually on target to implement positive train control by the end of the year. For the already cash-strapped commuter railroads around the country, it's a completely different story. For them, Congress's refusal to fund positive train control has pretty much stopped implementation in its tracks. Expected to cost commuter railroads nearly $3.5 billion, it's no wonder that over 70% of commuter railroads won't achieve positive train control implementation before this year's deadline. Our commuter railroads are integral to the daily commute of millions of Americans. In fact, Amtrak's annual ridership pales in comparison to our nation's commuter railroads. While Amtrak carries 30 million riders a year, commuter railroads carry close to 500 million. In the Chicago area alone, Metro's ridership last year was over 80 million. With numbers like that, how can Congress justify mandating a policy that they know commuter railroads simply cannot afford while providing very little funding to help them do it? This unfunded mandate is forcing rails to sacrifice other investments that are crucial to railroad safety and efficiency. 50% of commuter railroads are currently deferring other capital investments to implement positive train control. And what happens when the commuters aren't able to implement this technology before the end of this year? They get penalized, fined. Instead of giving money to commuters to pay for PTC, the federal government is actually going to end up collecting money from them for not being able to afford to do so. For good reason, Congress mandated incredibly important and incredibly expensive new technology. But it's amounted to a lot of words and very little action. The same 2008 law that mandated PTC also authorized $50 million a year in rail safety technology grants to help Amtrak and commuter railroads pay for this implementation. But in the 7 years since the law was passed, Congress has only appropriated funding once. $50 million a year wasn't enough then, and it's sure not enough now. That's why I introduced a bill with Congressman Lipinski in March to reauthorize PTC funding at $200 million a year. It's time for Congress to finish what it started. It's time for Congress to get serious about investing in our nation's transportation infrastructure. And it's time for Congress to help our commuter railroads implement positive train control and prevent the kind of tragedies that we saw on Amtrak last week. Thank you.